Revelations.Unveiled. Detroit. Lynching in America, targeting Black veterans. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868, established that all persons born in the United States, regardless of race, are full citizens of the United States and of the states in which they reside, and are entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizenship, including due process. Though a hopeful development, the Supreme Court quickly dismantled the amendment's promise in slaughterhouse cases and U.S. versus Cruikshank. As a result, African Americans accused of violating the racial order were met with violence and terror. They received little protection from local officials, and they had no claim to federal assistance. Black veterans were seen as a particularly strong threat to racial hierarchy and were an early target of discriminatory state laws. To eliminate Black gun ownership, which had reached unprecedented levels during the war due to Black military service, states including Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Mississippi passed laws that made it a crime for an African American to possess a firearm. Florida's Black Code of 1866 prohibited Black people from possessing any Bowie knife, dirk sword, firearms, or ammunition of any kind, and made violations punishable by public whipping. Mississippi statute declared that no freedman, free Negro, or mulatto not in military service of the United States government and not licensed so to do by the Board of Police or of his or her country shall keep or carry firearms of any kind or any ammunition, dirk, or Bowie knife. Whites were free to own and carry firearms, but law enforcement officials were stationed at train stations to seize Black veterans' guns when they arrived. Veterans who did not comply were beaten, and some were even shot by police. Southern newspapers fueled whites' fears of Black veterans by publishing sensational accounts of so-called race wars, conflicts between supposedly innocent white police and drunk and armed former Black soldiers intent on starting trouble. In May 1866, after whites attacked the Black community in Memphis in what became known as the Memphis Massacre, the white-owned Memphis Argus published an editorial blaming the massacre on Black gun ownership. The editorial board wrote, "Again, the irresponsible conflict of races has broken out in our midst, and again our streets are stained with blood. And this time, there can be no mistake about it. The whole blame of this most tragical and bloody riot lies, as usual, with the poor, ignorant, deluded Blacks. We cannot suffer the occasion to pass without again calling the attention of the authorities to the indispensable necessity of disarming these poor creatures, who have so often shown themselves utterly unfit to be trusted with firearms. On this occasion, the facts all go to show, but for this much abused privilege accorded to them by misguided and misjudging friends, there would have not been a riot. The universal question asked on all corners of the streets is, why are not the Negroes disarmed? The violence in Memphis, now widely acknowledged as a racially motivated massacre. Dozens of black people were raped, injured, or killed, and many black homes, churches, and schools destroyed by fire. The two white casualties were both killed by white rioters. As the white Southern press decried their access to weapons and state legislatures strive to disarm them, black veterans were in dire need of protection. In 1868, the Secretary of War reported to Congress that black soldiers in Kentucky, having served in the Union Army, were the special objects of persecution and in hundreds of instances have been driven from their homes. Peter Banford, a United States Colored Troops veteran, was shot and killed without cause or provocation in Mercer County, Kentucky, while numerous other veterans were threatened, beaten, and whipped merely for attempting to locate their families and rebuild their lives after the war. At Bardstown in Nelson County, Kentucky, a mob brutally lynched a United States Colored Troops veteran. The mob stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and then cut off his sexual organs. He was then forced to run half a mile to a bridge outside of town, where he was shot and killed. The terror inflicted upon black veterans by Southern whites served to perpetuate the racial caste system and maintain power in the hands of whites after the defeat of the Confederacy. Mistreatment of black soldiers and veterans was not restricted to the South. Johnson C. Whitaker, who was born into slavery in South Carolina in 1858, was appointed to the United States Military Academy in West Point, New York in 1876 as one of the first black cadets in the Academy's history. On April 6, 1880, Whitaker was found unconscious and bloody on the floor of his dorm in only his underwear. His legs had been bound together and tied to his bed, and his arms were tied tightly together at the wrists. He recounted that 3 masked white men had jumped on him while he slept, tied him up, choked him, struck him in the head, bloodied his nose, broken a mirror on his forehead, and cut his earlobes while saying, "Let's mark him like they do hogs down south." 2 days after the attack, Whitaker had received an anonymous note reading, "You will be fixed. Better keep awake." Rather than condemn the attack, West Point administrators claimed Mr. Whitaker had staged it himself and court-martialed him. The prosecutor relied on notions of black inferiority and argued Negroes are noted for their ability to sham and feign. Mr. Whitaker was convicted and expelled from West Point. During the same decade, a mob of 50 whites from Sun River, Montana, lynched Robert Robinson, a black soldier stationed nearby at Fort Shaw. Mr. Robertson was a member of the 25th Infantry, an all-black unit that had been transferred to Montana from South Dakota just weeks earlier. Mr. Robinson had been arrested for allegedly shooting and killing a man. Before he could be tried, masked men entered the jail, demanded the key, and took Mr. Robinson from his cell and brought him to the alley behind Stone's store, where a mob lynched him and left his bloody body hanging over the alleyway. During the lynching era, white mobs regularly lynched black people with total impunity, facing no consequences for committing murder, even when the victim was an active duty American serviceman. Black soldiers stationed in unfamiliar and predominantly white areas were especially at risk of being presumed dangerous and guilty, accused of social transgression or crime, and lynched without an investigation or trial. On August 19, 1898, Private James Neely of the 25th Infantry, an all-black regiment that had just returned from heralded service in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, visited the small town of Hampton, Georgia, on a day pass from his post at Fort Hobson. Newspapers reported that Private Neely came into Hampton wearing his blue uniform proudly. Yet, when he entered the drugstore and ordered a soda at the counter, the white owner told him black customers had to order and drink outside in the rear. Private Neely protested. Then the two men argued, and Private Neely was thrown out of the store and onto the street outside, where the conflict attracted attention. As Private Neely continued to insist that he had rights as an American and a soldier, a crowd of armed white men gathered and chased him down the road, firing their weapons. Private Neely was later found dead of gunshot wounds. A local coroner's jury promptly declared that the murder had been committed by unknown parties. According to the Atlanta Constitution, Army officials did not immediately respond or make arrangements to retrieve Private Neely's remains.